Welcome to the Quack 12 Podcast, the most official, unofficial Oregon Ducks podcast on the web footosphere. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Quack 12 Podcast or visit our website, quack12podcast.com. If you like what you hear, please leave us 5 stars on your listening device. And if you'd like to support the show, please visit the Quack 12 Patreon page, where for a measly $5 a month, you can become an official Quacky and unlock hundreds of hours of Oregon Duck content. On to the show. Quack.
Quack, quack, quack. Oh boy, listeners, we got a great episode of our roster reviews for you today. First of all, we've got Hithliday. How you doing, Hithliday?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing very well because we get to talk to an old friend. That's right. Maybe these fan bases don't feel, good about each other, Oregon and USC. I really don't think there's much crossover there, except for like the Pittman family, But we love this podcast. We love this co-host. We love their co-host. We love everything about this. We've got Alicia De Artola-Castillo from Fansided, from Reign of Troy. How you doing, Alicia?
I'm doing excellent. College Football 25 came out, and I am all is right with the world, at least in that one very, very narrow part of our lives.
Well, you know what? That's the only part that matters right now. It's the only part I'm thinking about. Yes. So, of course, for now, fans of 2 Big Ten teams, as is normal, in this universe.
Totally. Yeah.
We're very excited to chat with you. And why not just get right into this roster? Hithliday, lead us through this.
So let's start with the coaching stuff. Last year or last offseason from 22 to 23, I don't believe there were any coaching changes, with the exception of the one caused by an unfortunate passing away. The 23 to 24, there are some changes. On the offensive side of the ball, Lincoln Riley has given up quarterback coaching and has given that over to Luke Heward, who was one of the 2 wide receivers coaches. So now Dennis Simmons is going to be doing all of the wide receivers coaching. Luke Heward is the dedicated quarterbacks coach. Do I have that right?
Correct.
Keel McDonald as running backs coach is out. Anthony Jones is in. Is that right?
Yes. And I also would call him Keel, but and this doesn't make sense. It's Kyle.
Really?
I hate that for everybody involved, but yes.
What happened to McDonald? What was up I understood the wide receiver, no explanation needed about that, but what was up with the running back coach switch?
I think he just wanted to leave for the NFL. I think that, I don't know if maybe it was the opportunity to be with Harbaugh. Sometimes college coaches also just want to be with the NFL instead. It's having not to recruit probably is a nice change of pace. So,
we're going to talk about it, but I mean, as we have, said on I think 4 consecutive podcasts now, that the rushing offense was the best part of this team. And it's sort of like a crying shame that the run game wasn't used more. So I sure hope he wasn't, feeling neglected.
I would definitely hope that's not the case. If it is, that's not necessarily something that I've heard. So I'm certainly hoping it's not.
Let's see. But the tight end coach, Zach Hansen, and the offensive line coach, Josh Henson, both return in their positions.
Yes. And we don't get those names mixed up ever.
Very good.
Or the defensive line coach, who also has a similar name mixed up. Right. Ever. I never do that.
On the defense, Alex Grinch is out. Danton Lynn from UCLA is in. I don't think Lynn has any position coaching duties. Sean Nua keeps his job coaching defensive ends, but they brought in a new defensive tackles coach. That's Eric Henderson.
Yes.
Let's see. Both of the linebackers coaches are out, and Matt Entz is in, and then both Alex Grinch, who was the safeties coach, and Dante Williams, the cornerbacks coach, are out, and Doug Belk, who was the Houston defensive coordinator for a couple of years, which is interesting. I was watching a bunch of Houston's defensive film because Oregon got a transfer from there. He's going to be the defensive backs coach. Is that correct?
Yes, that is all correct.
Belk I really dug Belk's defensive schemes, or at least with the defensive front. Like he did lots of interesting stuff with the defensive fronts. Of course, he kept getting let down by how bad his secondaries were, and so I was like,
yeah,
I don't think he was really responsible for that. I think it was just a talent issue. But I was just made me laugh. It's like that's don't put him there. Anyway, I think he's a sharp mind. It will be interesting to see how he works out as a secondary coach. That's sort of, I don't know. It sort of feels like a pit stop to me, but
for a lot of these guys, it does. We have been talking about this defensive coaching staff, and it's interesting how overqualified so many of them are. On the one hand, that's really good for USC this year. On the other hand, if things do go right for USC, it's going to be hard to keep that group together. Yeah.
I want to talk about more the defensive scheme and structure when we get to the defensive side of the ball. Let's jump in with the offensive roster. Just a little bit of an overview. Between 2022 and 2023, the offense basically it got Lincoln Riley as we have been talking about for a little while, the offense is highly successful. It's sort of not successful in the stuff that you would think it is. Like if anybody sort of closed their eyes and imagined what a Lincoln Riley offense would be really good at, you would think it's like, this really efficient passing offense because it's, all these RPOs and deadly passing, weapons everywhere. And like that was the biggest fall off. Like they fell actually, underwater in 2023 to 48% pass, efficiency. I sort of that part of that is I think they just played some tougher defenses than they did in 2022. They had the 2022 they missed Oregon and Washington. 23 they had to play those teams. On the other hand, the rush explosiveness keeps getting better. Like they got obviously I think part of that is getting Marshawn, but like on the other hand, the rush success rate collapses by 10 points. It's still above water, but it's like, I mean, the rush success, the efficiency rushing is still the best part of the offense, but it wasn't as amazing as it was in 2022. It's the same old bugaboo. It's the offensive line. Like they just still hadn't fixed their offensive line. We'll talk about the unit when we get there, but I just before we get to the particular units, does all that match up with your observations?
Yeah, yes, completely spot on, actually. And one of my many frustrations with watching that offense, which was objectively, high powered, but also frustratingly inefficient for how high powered it was.
Yeah. I mean, like super explosive, but
and that's where that's where the Caleb Williams of it all sort of comes in, because you could watch USC's offense last year and believe that it was just all Caleb Williams. If you didn't know anything about Lincoln Riley's track record, you might think that USC was going to completely fall off a cliff because that the offense just was Caleb Williams making it go.
Which isn't true. Like I really think that this, the scheme is excellent. Although I still, I mean, we're 2 years into Lincoln Riley at USC, but I've been watching the guy for a while. I was studying him in Oklahoma before this, and like I really dig the scheme. I often sometimes wonder if Lincoln Riley is the right guy to be calling his own scheme. Like, like I sort of love him as a play designer, but like I often find inefficiencies in the ways that he's calling his scheme. And like I think he gets caught out, especially in like second halves. Like I think he sometimes falls into loops.
Yes.
although actually, like, the Oregon game was really fascinating, where he busted out a unique and fun run play on the first play of each drive against Oregon, which I was just like, this is like watching a virtuoso painter. Like, this is really cool.
Well, when he's in his bag, he's
Yeah.
in his bag. It's just I think especially this past season, it felt like he was maybe got caught off guard a few times, or didn't have the adjustment or the composure to sort of stay in his bag.
Yeah. I think the other thing, just as a national narrative, that we talked about this the last time we talked, which was, when USC played Oregon, there was only a couple of games left in the year. But the last time we talked, the thing that there was a national narrative because Alex Grinch had just gotten fired. And the national narrative at that time was like, the difference between USC in 22, in which they won, double-digit games, and in 23, in which they didn't, was that the defense had gotten so bad that it was no longer sustainable. And it's like, in one sense, I guess technically that's true, in that the interceptions that had kept them going in 2022 had disappeared. But in another sense, like that, that was inevitable. Like, there was regression to the mean. The defensive numbers are sort of fundamentally pretty much identical. Like, in F plus, for example, it changes from 101st in 2022 to 100th in 2023. There's no real fundamental change in the defense. It's that what changes is that the offense gets less efficient.
And I think you're spot on that the offense got less efficient, and also just the schedule got harder in terms of the offenses they faced. The quarterbacks that they faced were just far and away better than any of the quarterbacks they had faced previously, just between Shedeur Sanders and Noah Fafita and Notre Dame with Sam Hartman, and
they played a better quarterback
Washington, Oregon.
Cal than Cal had previously.
Yes, exactly. And so I think the defense was maybe exploited a little bit more effectively across that board. But mostly, maybe people don't remember, but the last 7 or so games of the 2022 season was literally Caleb Williams being like that. He won the Heisman because he was literally just outscoring everybody that USC played. Yeah. And he couldn't do that this time around.
And that sort of takes us to the quarterback discussion. Caleb Williams was the number 1 draft pick, or was widely anticipated. I was on a couple of NFL podcasts where I was asked that question. Should people take Caleb Williams, who's on a 7-5 team? And I was like, yes, absolutely. In my opinion, all of his problems stemmed from having to deal with a lousy offensive line. Put him in front of a good or behind a good offensive line, and he will light the world on fire. That's still my opinion. We're going to talk about the offensive line later, but just as an overview, Alicia, do you agree with that opinion?
1,000,000%. Caleb Williams is, in my view, in terms of quarterbacks that I have ever watched play football, he is the most outstanding at the college level that I've ever seen. And where he went wrong this past year had a lot to do with him. Number one, the offensive line being less effective. Number 2, the wide receiver core just across the board, with maybe the exception of Taj Washington, just being more meh than anybody really anticipated. And number 3, wanting to win as hard as he wants to win. I think he was just pressing a lot, like knowing that the defense wasn't going to get a stop. He goes out and is just maybe trying too hard to be Superman on every play, trying too hard to end every drive with a touchdown, which is something you obviously want, but no quarterback is actually capable of doing it. And I think it affected his decision making. I think it affected his the rhythm and flow of a game. I think it affected pretty much everything. Just what was around him at USC was not a platform upon which he could continue to pull off what he did in 2022. That doesn't take anything away from the sheer raw ability and competitive fire and every element of him as a quarterback is like any NFL team that would pass on him, go get checked. Get checked for some sort of lapse of brain power.
Well, I mean, none did. So
yeah.
In particular the Notre Dame game, I totally know what you mean in terms of him pressing.
Mhm.
There are other games that are plagued by turnovers where I don't think that was the game against UCLA. There's a ton of turnovers. I don't really think that was him pressing. That was just like some crazy
Well, there's also reversion to the mean there too, because
Sure.
he was extremely he protected the football extremely well in 2022. Like his interception numbers and fumble numbers in 2022 don't necessarily reflect the way that he played football in 2022. Yeah. And there was, a little bit more of that's what happens when you go out and try to make that.
It's a live by the sword, die by the sword thing. It's like, that's why advanced statisticians generally just toss out the turnover numbers and try to look at fundamental strengths.
Yes.
So, and as you were saying earlier, like, I think anybody's a fool who just dismisses, Lincoln Riley's offense as, it was just Caleb Williams playing hero ball. And so Caleb Williams goes this offense. I think that is folly, but at the same time, like, man, I watched that. I called him in my USC preview the most gifted improviser as a quarterback that I've ever seen in my life, and I still believe that's true. I think all of this is going to, which is, why I think he's, a generational NFL pick, because you simultaneously get an extraordinarily gifted pure pocket passer and a simultaneous, very gifted RPO. Like, he can run multiple kinds of offenses, and when all else goes wrong, he can also improvise plays in an Aaron Rodgers kind of way. Like, he 3 different awesome quarterbacks smushed into one. Man. So all of this goes to say, big shoes to fill, man.
Yeah. Good luck, Miller Moss.
Yeah, exactly. The other departure we should say before we move any further is Malachi Nelson. He transferred out to Boise State. We didn't really see him at all. I think he got like 3 garbage time passes, and I think that's all the departures, right?
At quarterback, yes.
Yeah. They brought in, I don't believe they took a freshman in the recruiting cycle. They have one addition, that's Jaden Maeva, who from UNLV. He led the UNLV to the Mountain West Conference title game, where they fell to, of all things, Boise State. Maeva was interesting to watch. Their offense was interesting to watch as the go-go offense from William & Mary a couple of years ago. He was a redshirt freshman last year. He'll be a redshirt sophomore this year. The other 2 quarterbacks in the room, and I believe there are only 2, are Miller Moss, who we didn't really see until the bowl game against Louisville, in which he shredded them in a pretty comical way. And then Jake Jensen, who I believe was a unrated dude who initially went to BYU, and then he was at a JUCO, and I think he's the number 3 in the room.
I assume there are bodies in there that are walk-ons that are technically there, but I couldn't name them.
So my opinion is that Miller Moss has the job. I just think he's more. I think that we were talking a little off air. I think that Maeva is going to be really good for Lincoln Riley's offense in a couple of years when he matures. Like, he's got a good frame for it, but he just mentally needs to grow up a little bit more. And I think Moss is ready to play right now, or at least he's more ready to play than any of the other 2 dudes in the room. And so this one's pretty easy. It's Moss's job until and unless, and knock on wood, he gets hurt. Did you see it the same way, Alicia?
Yeah, I think that it's very clear that Lincoln Riley at least trusts Moss more than anybody else. If USC had brought in a transfer quarterback that wasn't such a developmental prospect, we might have had a quarterback battle, but that really didn't develop because of the way that the portal went. And USC was never going to bring in a freshman this year because of the recruitment of Julian Lewis for next year. So they sort of had all their eggs.
Another knock on wood.
Yeah, all their eggs in that basket. The interesting thing, I think, with Miller Moss and Jaden Maeva, and I don't think the comparison is actually going to come to pass. But there has been a little bit of a discussion of like, is USC set up to have a 2016? Everyone knows that Max Brown is the guy, but the more sort of dynamic guy behind is Sam Darnold.
Mhm.
And after a rough start to the season, does the more sort of traditional pocket passing, presumptive number one get ousted in favor of the more, maybe a little bit more higher ceiling, flashy option? I think that would be interesting. I certainly think the schedule sets up for that if that's going to be the way that it plays out. But I also, I don't know that it's quite the same dynamic with Maeva relative to Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I mean, we have more data on Maeva in that he played one season.
Yeah.
But it was at the Mountain West level, and frankly, most of the defenses that he played were terrible. We've got exactly one game for Miller Moss. It was a bowl game. It's way too fraught, to really comment. He threw 6 touchdowns. I just don't think it's a big enough sample. And I think there's too many problems in the way that sample is constructed to infer much about it. I think we know that he's going to be starter, and I just want to check in on him mid-year. I think it's interesting. I think you're probably right that Maeva is a better fit for what Lincoln Riley wants to do in his full flower, and it's just a question of when that flower arrives. I doubt that that's going to be this year, but I don't know, maybe.
You really never know, especially because we don't know enough about Miller Moss outside of that bowl game, which obviously, like, I'm much happier that he threw 6 touchdowns than any alternative.
Yeah.
We just don't know what he's going to look like against an LSU or a Michigan, and he's gonna have those very, very early tests to sort of show whether or not he can be the top dog for Lincoln Riley, and if he's not, there is someone behind who maybe isn't ready to go quite yet, but is an option, as has starting experience in college football, and there will be calls for him if things go wrong with Miller Moss.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. Running back. Losing both of last year's primary ball carriers, Marshawn Lloyd and Austin Jones. Lloyd was drafted in the 3rd round by the Packers. Jones signed a UDFA with the Commanders. Both of them had relatively high success rates, or above water success rates. Lloyd had a very good yards per carry number at 7.0. I didn't really get enough data to evaluate, or outside of garbage time carries to evaluate anybody else. Not Darwin Barlow, who transferred out to UNC. I figured I'd mention him just because he got a few carries. Matt Colombo, who transferred to San Diego. I didn't get enough for the 2 returners, Quentin Joyner or Amarian Peterson. I think that's it in terms of returners and departures. Did I miss anybody?
That's everybody. Yeah.
Okay. They got. I saw both Joyner and Peterson in the spring game. Joyner was one of the 2 backs playing with the ones, or at least I think the number 1 offense. I saw Peterson actually sort of the latest. Surprised me a little bit because I saw the true freshman Brian Jackson, I think, a little bit earlier. Brian Jackson's like a high 3-star who's an early enrollee. I guess we'll see how that goes. But I think the top back is going to be Woody Marks, the Mississippi State transfer. Before I go any farther, that's the room, right? Those 4 dudes?
Yeah, that's everybody. Everybody of note, at least.
What do you think about Marks?
I'm excited. I'm quite excited about Marks. Supposed to got a nice bit of speed on him. Can catch the ball out of the backfield. The way that USC, I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but the 2 years that Lincoln Riley has been at USC, the 2 running backs that USC has brought in as transfers have wormed their way into my heart extremely quickly. So the evaluations have been good. The system has been good to these backs. And I think that Woody Marks is set up to do the same thing that Marshawn Lloyd did, which, he was a promising but maybe unfulfilled or incomplete sort of prospect when he came over from South Carolina. And that's sort of where Woody Marks is he hasn't necessarily had a ton of production yet at this point in his career, but he has a skill set that I think will fit Lincoln Riley's offense quite well. And we've seen, as you and I have both said, like USC's running game in this offense can be super effective. You just have somebody who has the sort of hallmarks that you need, and Woody Marks brings some damn good speed for his size. So yeah, let's roll.
Well, number one, you're right about Lloyd. He increases his yards per carry by 2 full yards per carry between his last season at South Carolina and his year at USC. And that's the scheme, because it's sure as hell ain't the offensive line.
Yes.
Because, that's point B, is that it's the way that the scheme is operated, gets the defense out the way. And so then it's simply a matter of you need to make the cut at the right point in the backfield, and you need to beat one dude to generate chunk yardage runs, because it's not going to be about beating 2 or 3 dudes who are left in the box, because those guys are cleared out by the nature of the RPO scheme. Lloyd was very good at it. We don't really know if Marks is going to be good at it, because that wasn't Mississippi State's scheme. But I mean, honestly, I wouldn't have gotten great odds on it, because I would have had to be charting the SEC, and I wasn't. But I think it sort of remains to be seen. But his track record has been, obviously I would have vouched for Dye anyway. But I could have told you, yeah, no, perfect. And I did vouch for Austin Jones, when he came over from Stanford. Yeah, no, exactly. One cut, break the tackle. Yeah, perfect. I think his evaluations are pretty good. My question is how the rest of this rotation goes. What do you, like I said, I didn't get enough eyes, outside of garbage time on Joyner or Peterson to figure out what to think about those guys. They were both 2023 dudes who came in. What do you think?
I think it's going to be Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner sort of taking the Austin Jones sort of box of carries. Everything we've seen from Joyner and Peterson has been really promising. It's been very limited, obviously, but they both bring the exact skill set that you sort of you can see the 1-for-1 in my eyes watching Joyner versus Austin Jones. Joyner might even be just a little bit quicker, better breakaway speed. Peterson is hard to evaluate, a little bit harder to evaluate, because we have just seen less of him. Joyner pretty clearly stepped forward in that pecking order last year, and Peterson ended up sort of being in a redshirt situation. I'm not sure exactly what the story is as far as what it is that Joyner's doing different, but every time he was given the ball, he looked the part. At a certain point, I was looking at him going okay, yeah, USC is going to be okay at running back next year, regardless of what transfers come in, because if you end up having to start Quentin Joyner, you're going to be in a pretty decent spot.
All right.
The real question mark I have is the Marion Peterson and Brian Jackson, what that pecking order comes to, because you're right, Brian Jackson, we saw a lot more of him in the spring game than I expected. It's hard with spring game snaps, because especially with running backs, because so much of it is, who is or isn't injured, who is or isn't being protected in terms of the number of carries that they get, snaps that they see in that context. So it's difficult to say, but they really like Brian Jackson as a recruit, even though, like you said, he's a 3-star guy, but the talk around him was much, much more optimistic than just a sort of a 3-star prospect. So I wouldn't be surprised if he moves up there into that pecking order. But when it comes down to it, the rotations, this will be very interesting, because Kyle McDonald was, it seemed to me, a very, I have my guy, my Marshawn Lloyd or my Travis Dye, and I might give him a break every once in a while with an Austin Jones type to come in, but mostly it would be main guy number 1 and then sort of secondary guy number 2. Will that be the same with a new running backs coach, Anthony Jones. I don't know how he managed TCU's running backs in that regard, or what the context for TCU was, whether or not they sort of were in a position to cycle through guys. But, Imani Bailey was the number one guy, right? And he, they let him carry the load. So is it going to be a situation where it's the Woody Mark show? I wouldn't be surprised if it just became the Woody Mark show.
Okay, tight ends. They used 3 last year, although I really only got, in terms of ball catching, I only got enough data on one of them to get an evaluation. That was Lake McCree, who wasn't bad, about a 60% success rate, 8.3 yards per target adjusted. The other 2 were Carson Tabarachi, who also returns like Lake McCree does. He was a transfer from Utah and converted from a linebacker. Interesting. And the other one is Jude Wolf, who'd been around forever and finally transferred out. I think he went to San Diego State. I think Jude Wolf is the only departure from the room. Is that right?
Yes, from a very, very small tight end room. Yes.
Well, I mean, they've been cutting it down. It used to be way too big, and I think given
get ready, because they had been cutting it down. Past tense.
Are they taking a lot in the 2025 cycle?
Well, this cycle, they get Joey Olsen and Walter Matthews as the freshmen. They also get Walker Lyons, who was from the previous cycle, but on his mission.
I forgot about him.
Yes. So now it's an injection of 3 first-year players. Because of the whole Walker Lyons thing. So
how do you think that plays? Just to complete the recitation, there's one other guy who comes back. That's Cade Eldridge, although I've never seen this guy until the spring game when he was the only guy who was available, because I don't think Walter Matthews or Joey Olsen were on campus yet, and Lake McCree and Carson Tabarachi were injured.
Correct. Yeah.
What do you think about Cade Eldridge?
I don't want to say just a guy, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like.
I mean, the incoming dudes are much more exciting on paper.
Yes, I think that is the correct way to sort of frame it. Is of that room, he and Carson Tabarachi, you just sort of look at and go like, okay, bodies. We'll see if they can contribute at some point. It's the other guys that I think get your mouth watering. So will they have a leg up because they've been there? They've been in a college weight room. They've been part of the offense and may just stay in front of the pecking order for that reason. Or are they soon to be just phased out, because any one of the 3 guys that's coming in are, very exciting from a tight end perspective.
Well, I mean, given what I've seen of this offense, it varies between 11 and a lot of times just 10 personnel. I don't really think that, I mean, obviously sometimes they go to 12 or heavier when they're in very select circumstances, but I kind of think it's the Lake McCree show for most of the time. This is probably his last year. They'll get Tabarachi to block if they want a second guy. The 3 incoming dudes, red shirt, and then we'll just see who the best of them is for 2025 is the way that I see the shape of the room. Do you have a different take?
I think that's the most likely. The most likely outcome is definitely, I 100% agree. It's Lake McCree is the main man there. And I don't know that they have, big plans for anybody else that's there. I think Walker Lyons is just going to be a very interesting one to track, given,
has he gotten on campus yet?
I think he comes on campus in the fall. Well, I think he would be, summer workouts and all that kind of stuff. But, USC has been operating with a skeleton crew at that position. Yeah. And now that they have sort of filled things out, will we see them? It really just depends on how ready those guys are. And I just can't speak to how none of us can speak to how ready they are. Because like you said, they, not early enrollees. Walker Lyons hasn't played football for, over a year. It's hard to say, but the way that USC had been using the tight ends, like you said, like it hasn't felt like USC has really prioritized the tight end as a position.
Yeah.
But was that?
Well, I mean, you called it last summer about Deuce Robinson switching over to be a wide receiver. It was exactly what happened.
Yes, and he is full blown wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And you could look at somebody at a couple of these guys and say, like, is that the plan for them too? I don't think it's as easy a sort of parallel to or line to draw as Deuce Robinson was, but like Joey Olsen, he could be one of those maybe hybrid kind of inside receiver figures for USC and not necessarily tight end in the traditional sense where he's going to be out there in heavy sets blocking as sort of his main role. But this is the thing, is I don't think we've seen USC operate with this number of tight ends available to them that theoretically could become sort of trusted figures in an offense. It's entirely possible we go into this year and it's exactly the same, where it's basically Lake McCree and you only see other people if injuries happen, or we could go into the season and all of a sudden USC's like, oh no, we have tight ends now. Let's go and use them.
Yeah, it's just rare for that to be a freshman,
Yeah, for sure. And this could be all part of the plan. The thing is though, that I'm sort of drawing conclusions from USC is they continue to recruit the tight end position.
No, he wants to. I mean, he wants
like
to have
he
one,
wants tight ends, not just Deuce Robinson type tight ends, but like, you don't go for Walter Matthews, who's a 6'6", 250-pound guy, unless you sort of are looking for that. And maybe that's the Big Ten transition. Maybe they've looked at that and thought, you know what, we're going to need to up the ante there with the tight ends. So
yeah. No, it's just like there's a bunch of conditioning. So like tight ends have to be like supreme athletes, right? Because they have to be able to block and they have to be able to, run on every down. It's just like it's just rare. It's
hard to be a great tight end.
Yeah, exactly. And given the profile of these guys as non-early enrollees, and then the one who's coming back from a mission, it's just like if it were going to happen, I would have expected them to be in school in January, and for you to be telling me like, oh man, my eyes pop whenever that guy,
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about wide receivers. So a lot of departures. Taj Washington, who I agreed with you, he was always pretty good. I think he really took a step forward in 2023 in a way that surprised me. By far the most valuable guy on the team in terms of success rate and yards per target. And I was surprised that he fell as far in the draft as he did. He went in the 7th round.
Yeah, I think that's just like a profile thing. He doesn't jump off the page in terms of the measurables.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot of effective short receivers in the NFL. Brendan Rice, the other way around. Like I think they should have loved his
measurables.
Yeah, right. On the other hand, it just he's frustrating all year long. He also 7th round to the Chargers. 4 guys transferred out. Mario Williams transferred to Tulane. Just sort of, they felt like ever since he came over from Oklahoma, it'd been like each year was a little more disappointing than the last.
Well, it's ironic that he goes to, or it's funny that he goes to Tulane, who he single-handedly helped.
He handed the game
win
to.
That game.
Dorian Singer transferred to Utah. I think that guy counts as the biggest disappointment. Like he was lights out for Arizona and 42% success rate for USC. That sucked. I mean, I don't think he sucked. It was just unfortunate they couldn't figure out how to use him. The Michael Jackson transferred to Georgia. I don't know why. He wasn't very effective. And then Raleek Brown, who was the super speedy running back who got converted to a wide receiver and then was only used in 2 games. I'm not sure why. Transferred to ASU. Did he get hurt? What was the deal with Raleek Brown?
It felt like there was something going on in terms of him. Like, well, okay. For one, it's not that he got hurt; it's that he decided to. I believe it was just he decided to redshirt at a certain.
No, he shut it down so that he.
Yes, he shut it down. Before he shut it down, it was a question of like, what did he need to do to earn playing time, and it felt like under the surface, it was like that he wasn't doing the things that maybe he needed to do to earn playing time.
Those 6 guys, Washington, Rice, Williams, Singer, Jackson, Brown, those are the 6 departures from the wide receiver room.
Yes.
They return Zachariah Branch. They return the 4 2023 dudes. Those are Zachariah Branch, Deuce Robinson, Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon. All of those guys are like super talented. Branch and Deuce Robinson played, I don't want to say extensively, but they did get meaningful play. Both of them were below water in terms of their efficiency. Actually, Deuce Robinson was really deeply below water. He had like 2 good plays all year.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the talent on that guy, but it's just like he's sort of the poster child for why you typically don't see true freshmen lighting the world on fire as wide receivers. It's actually sort of a compliment to Zachariah Branch that he was only a little bit underwater as a true freshman. And then Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon, I just didn't really see enough. I mean, you could see you can see those guys are talented. And I mean, they melted Louisville's face, but I don't want to talk about that game because Louisville. We're just going to open too big of a can of worms about the ACC if we talk about that game. So it's those 4 freshmen who I think are, the most intriguing guys because they're the super high talent dudes in the room. But then 2 more, one more scholarship returner, and that's Kyron Hudson, who I've always thought is a valuable guy. He's actually has the highest success rate of any of the returners, 61%. It's just like lob him the ball and he'll catch it. Like his yards per target number is not that high, but like I always thought he's a valuable dude to have on the team. It's probably why he's survived that long. I'll stop there. Do you disagree with any of the opinions I've expressed about these dudes?
No, I think that's all spot on, especially the four really, really intriguing, high potential young guys who maybe weren't ready to make the impact last year. But you look at them this year and it's like USC needs 2 of those guys to pop. 2 of the 4 need to pop.
Yeah.
And I would err on the side of 2 of the 4 will pop, at least just from what we've seen. They're too good to have to wait too much longer to start really making a name for themselves. Kyron Hudson is one of those, like, if Taj Washington hadn't already just been, the quarterback's favorite, best friend for the 2 years that the 3 years that he'd been at USC, like I would talk about Kyron Hudson the way I talk about Taj Washington, in the sense that, like, why doesn't he play more? Why didn't he get more reps in a very mediocre USC receiving core from 2020, 2023? I don't know. I think Michael Jackson III is another one of those guys who USC fans looked at and thought, Dorian Singer isn't exactly doing anything right now.
Yeah.
Why is Kyron Hudson and why is Michael Jackson III? Why are they out of the loop in terms of being heavy rotation guys?
The Hudson, I mean, I can tell you from a statistical perspective, the fact that Hudson was not getting as many catches or targets and Singer is almost single-handedly explains the explosive but not efficient problem. Because that's those 2 guys' statistical profile. There's one true freshman addition, that's Xavier Jordan. I cracked wise on Twitter that USC had half as many freshman recruits at wide receiver as they had wide receivers coaches. Now they're down to just 1 wide receivers coach, so it's perfectly even. He is yet another very exciting dude. I saw him with, I think, the 3s in the spring game, so he's on campus and he looks exciting. He's a shorter guy. He's like 5'11".
Yeah, rave reviews from spring. Yeah.
I think that USC is chock full of young guys and that he'll probably redshirt unless he really sets the world on fire, which, like I said, I think you just don't expect that out of a freshman. What do you think about that, Alicia?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think maybe an injury crisis pushes him up the line.
Sure.
But he'll more likely be like a Mekhi Lemon, who sort of didn't end up redshirting, but sort of was like on the brink of being sort of a guy that you might look at and say, like, he's going to redshirt.
Guys this talented, it doesn't make sense to redshirt. I mean, I'm using the term sort of vestigially, as like he's not going to play, but like in the area of the transfer portal, guys that are this talented are gone in 3 years. anyway.
Anyways,
They're either because they're going to the NFL or because they're on somebody else's team. So what the hell's the point of preserving the red shirt?
Yes, and that's where Xavier Jordan could end up playing every game because they use him on special teams and see him as an option behind that group of the regular rotation. But if he is a big part of this offense, I would be surprised, and not as a reflection of him at all. It's more a reflection of I sort of expect that there's already a crowd trying to get in there to be
of young guys,
guys,
like,
yes,
and the young guys who were on campus already for a year, and as you say, like we're sort of waiting, we're in a wait and see of who exactly is going to pop, and so adding to the like another guy who might, it's like we're already spinning the wheel, man. They took 4 dudes in the portal, and boy, what a motley crew. I just mean their provenance is for all over the map.
Yes,
it's not like they took 4 or 5 stars. I mean, they took 1 5-star. In order of number of catches that they got last year, descending order, they got Jaden Richardson, who played for Division III, I believe, Tufts University, hell of an international relations school, who got 46 catches last year. They got Jay Fair, who was a 3-star from Auburn and got 31 catches last year. They got Charles Ross, who initially signed with Nevada as a low 3-star back in 2018, then transferred to San Jose State, which means I think that USC has played him a couple of times.
But I'm pretty sure the best game of his career came against USC.
USC takes a lot of transfers from schools that play their best game against USC, and they're like, well, if they can beat us, join us. And then the guy who got the fewest catches of these transfers, the once and future Trojan, Kyle Ford, who went to UCLA last year, got a 56% per target success rate and 5.8 yards per target because Chip Kelly was running that offense. What a fool. I think he tweeted as much. Like I was a fool to do this.
He said something like my bad. Like I'm back. No, what? Hold on. I used what he said. My fault. I was tripping. was how he announced his return to USC.
Very good. I mean, that definitely, like, I charted all of UCLA and I charted all of Dante Moore's film, in which, like, oh my God, Chip Kelly's playbook for a pocket passer and for a wide receiver who would be best utilized for that type of offense. And then, like, Chip Kelly doesn't know what he's doing. And I was just like, man, everybody was tripping on that offense. The offensive line was tripping over its own feet. Like, everybody was tripping on that offense. Like, what are you doing? Fortunately, everyone involved in that equation is now where they belong. How do you think these transfers shake out?
It's like USC went to the island of misfit toys and said, you have been mistreated in that offense, and you have been mistreated by playing in that offense, and you have been mistreated by playing in that offense. Like Jay Fair at Auburn, it's like I genuinely did a double take when I looked up Jay Fair at Auburn, because it was like, oh, he was like Auburn's leading receiver. And I was like, oh, that must be really good. And then I looked at Auburn's receiving numbers and my jaw dropped. Like,
for 2 straight years that I was watching Auburn, their leading receiver was a fullback.
Yes. Dire stuff for Jay Fair, dire stuff for Kyle Ford. Jaden Richardson is really intriguing because, like, he's a dude who is gonna shoot his shot at a going up a level, and he's doing pretty well at a lower level. Let's see what he can do.
He's going up a couple of levels.
I mean, a couple of levels, yeah. But that's what it's like. USC decided if we're not going to go out and get any of the big name wide receivers on the transfer market, the Jordan Addisons, if you will, then we're just going to find a bunch of guys who are floating under the radar, and maybe they'll hit and maybe they won't. I'm fascinated by the group. There's very little excitable about any of them, certainly relative to the returning guys that USC has coming in. But I'm like, Well, I don't know. Is this the wide receiver version of like Marshawn Lloyd turning out to you take him out of South Carolina and suddenly you take Jay Fair out of Auburn and suddenly he's gonna do some stuff. I would not be surprised at all if not a single one of them does anything for USC. But hey, you know, you need the bodies. You might as well see what these guys can do.
It's just that like Lincoln Riley's hit rate with transfer wide receivers is, and this is, look, man, it's the law of averages. he hit on Taj Washington, he hit on Jordan Addison, he missed on everybody else.
Yep.
Or the other, it's 1/3 misses and 1/3 in betweens because.
Yes.
It's the law of averages. Like no one gets to escape the law of averages. Like, you know, for every fan in the universe who believes, no, my coach, you know, hits, you know, above the line, and my rival's coach hits below the line. No, you don't. You know, the nobody does. Everybody, you know, the pop rate is governed by the law of averages. So you got 4 of them, 1, maybe 2 will pop. That's it. And it's just about buying enough raffle tickets.
Yeah.
I sort of figure they need 1 or 2 experienced guys to supplement the couple of guys, you know, who are Kyron Hudson's been around long enough that we know who Kyron Hudson is. He's a tall possession receiver who's going to catch the ball whenever you lob it to him. He will get, you know, your efficiency passes. You're gonna get, you know, from the talent of the 2023 dudes, you're gonna get a couple of guys who, because their ceilings are so high, you only need 1 or 2 of them to really pop, because whoever it is will melt faces, especially going to the Big Ten. And then you just need a floor, you know, 1 or 2 guys out of the transfer portal who've already established they can catch the ball, which all 4 of these guys, whatever else you can say about them, each of them last year caught at least 22 passes. For Jaden Richardson, he cost 46 passes. You know, it's between 22 and 46, which means their hands work, right?
Their hands work, and in across the board, and this is not meant as an offense to any of the teams that these players came from, but coming from offenses with
they don't have Lincoln Riley running them.
Subpar scheme and or quarterback and or just philosophy, they caught the ball, like you said.
Yeah.
The lottery tickets are maybe not as exciting as like Isaiah Bond or Evan Stewart. But I mean, this is where I'm not trying to make an excuse for USC. I don't think it's necessarily as cut and dry as this. But like, part of me wonders if USC was not as aggressive as they needed to be in the running for some of those bigger named transfer wide receivers, because they didn't necessarily want to clog the pathway for someone like Deuce Robinson or Zachariah Branch. And maybe USC just looked at it and was like, yeah, let's go get some veteran guys who are just going to be there and
that are non-threatening,
yeah, and just get the job done.
I mean, like, I don't know how ego management works or fits into this. I mean, literally, I'm not trying to make a joke. Like, I at this level, I don't know how coaches manage the players' egos and to what extent you need to consider these things. I sort of think that's what the money is for.
In the transfer portal era, it is really hard to sort of get a handle on that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really not trying to kid around or to like cast, throw elbows at USC. Like, it probably is a serious factor, and it probably is something that is like really challenging to do. And there's probably Oregon fans and others who are listening to this and snickering and thinking like, oh, well, if you have a healthy
but Oregon's
culture,
doing it. Yeah,
right. Like, it's real easy. Everybody loves participating. It's just like, I sort of think everything's probably a little more mercenary than that, and it's probably a lot more complicated than that. I just don't have the answers to those questions, and I think that's probably, your suggestion of like, go get a bunch of misfits, but at least they've proven they can catch the ball, and then bet that the 2023 guys are not going to be scared off and not going to have a higher than average bust rate, and that combined is your optimal solution for a wide receiver room. Like, actually, that sounds pretty logical to me. I don't know that it is, in fact, the most optimal solution, but I'm willing to bet that you're going to get out of this the number of dudes that you need who can catch the ball in the Lincoln Riley offense, which is 4 reliable guys, of whom at least a couple will be face melters, and so therefore they will put up a lot of yards on Big Ten defenses.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly certainly the hope.
Let's talk about this offensive line.
Oh dear.
I mean, the rotation was weird last year. I mean, it started out making sense. Jonah Monheim was on the left tackle. Manuel Pregnon, the Wyoming transfer, was at left guard. Justin Dedich was at center. He finally got a shot. I'm not sure if he was as good as I hoped he was going to be. And then they had like a 3-man rotation going on the right side, which I didn't love. Jarrett Kingston, who's the guy who came in from Wazoo, started out at right guard, then moved back over to right tackle. Oh boy. And then Mason Murphy and Michael Tarquin. Mason Murphy, the homegrown, Tarquin, the Florida transfer, were rotating back and forth. At some point during the year, Kingston got hurt. And then I think like immediately thereafter, Murphy got hurt, or maybe he was benched. I'm not sure. Actually, do you know the answer to that?
There were a lot of injuries to keep track of. Honestly, I don't remember it being a benching issue with him. I think that with I think Pregnon and Tarquin had moments where it felt like they might have been pulled.
Yeah.
But injuries were little nicks and bruises and stuff just seemed to have it be a revolving door at times. It was extremely hard to keep track from a game to game perspective.
Yeah, you're telling me.
Yeah.
There were a couple other dudes that we saw at different points during the year. In the opener, we saw a couple of kiddos. Alan Inoa was playing left guard instead of Pregnon, and Elijah Page was playing left tackle in the bowl game. That really surprised me. We also, in the opener, saw Gino Quinones play right guard, and then he got like a season-ending injury, and I haven't seen him since. Like, I don't think he was playing in the spring game either. Let me first ask you about Quinones. Do you know what his status is?
He's supposed to be ready by fall, but yeah, okay. it was a long-term injury for him.
What we talked about last summer was how unusual it was that USC was taking 3 offensive line transfers: Pregnon from Wyoming, Kingston from Wazoo, Tarquin from Florida. I have been telling anybody who would listen, don't take 3 offensive line transfers, but that USC was a school that I was going to keep my eye on because they were, they're pretty highly valued in terms of the scouting services, thought that this was a good idea, and that USC had got them early and that it was always part of the plan. There was no confusion about the plan. I was like, if anybody is ever going to make this work, it'll be USC. So if USC makes it work, I might have to change my tune. Alicia, I don't think I'm changing my tune.
It did not work. Can confirm. 10 out of 10. Well, 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. You were spot on. And I am a believer. You tell everyone who will listen. I tell everyone who will listen that you have told me this and that I am a believer. So it spreads.
I want to convert. Yeah. Now, here's what's interesting about the data on this. Before I go any further, I will do the recitation in a moment, but before I go any further, since we brought up the transfer portal effect, there's a couple of things that also jump out about this pattern. One of them is the effect gets worse the more portal dudes you add. It's not just a portal dude has his numbers go down when he transfers to his new school. It's that each additional one that you add exponentially increases the dip. And because then there's only 5 spots on the line, the more dudes who are transfers who are each getting worse, right? So it's like catastrophically, it's this runaway effect, which I think is what happened. But here's the other interesting thing. Once a dude's been in once he's been in the program for a year, he's no longer a portal dude. Like, I don't theoretically understand why this is, but it's just like he's inculcated into the program now. And what I think is interesting is that they've knocked it off with the portal guys, right? Like, Kingston's gone, Tarquin's gone, and they haven't taken any more transfers. Pregnon remains. Now, I think you could make an argument that Pregnon was the least effective of them, which I think maybe surprised everybody because everybody was real excited about it. I was like, I don't know why. But they're going to be in a situation where I think Pregnon's their only transfer, and the portal effect may have worn off. So I am once again curious about USC's offensive line to see if that data is borne out and Pregnon is like suddenly an effective offensive lineman. In other words, if math remains undefeated. So that Let me register one other thing about the offensive line, which is that I think we've been fairly consistent in saying this is Clay Helton's fault.
Yes.
Offensive line holes take a long time to dig out of. And this was inherited from Clay Helton. And you can't, as we just finished discussing, you can't portal your way out of the offensive line. You have to homegrown your way out of it. And look, it appears to be that's what they're doing, for better or worse. Like, they knocked it off with the portal stuff. They're just taking recruits. The 23 and 24 classes have some, it's high 3 stars, some low 4 stars, and they're kind of sticking with their guns. I might actually be optimistic about I don't know about 2024. I kind of think there's some dudes on this line that I think maybe the ship has sailed on them. But I kind of think that Lincoln Riley got the memo, and this might be, they might be going in the right direction here. Alicia, what do you think about that?
I think the direction does feel corrected. This is a big year for Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, because he needs to prove that the evaluations he's made on the guys that they've added, and so far, I think people are feeling pretty okay with Elijah Page and Alani Noah being serviceable, at least that they can go in and be starters. The group that they brought in this as freshmen, there's things to like there. They continue to add guys in recruiting that there's sort of nuggets, kernels there that you can sort of see what they're looking at, but they're also missing on the big time, like elite level offensive line recruits in California alone, not even talking national, just the California offensive line recruits that USC has sort of let walk to places like Texas and Oklahoma and Florida State and all of those sort of places. So they need to prove that their evaluation and development of these offensive linemen is good enough to make up for the fact that they are missing, maybe not like 5-star guys, because those just don't get produced in California, but certainly strong 4-star talents that are walking out the door and making everything about USC's offensive line just feel like it's living on more of a knife's edge. So, on the one hand, yes, I do think they have done a lot of work to try and fill that offensive line hole with recruiting and sort of gone about it that way instead of, we're just going to load up on transfer guys this time around. At the same time, if that's their focus, then some of the guys they've lost in recruiting battles are, I think, a little even more frustrating. So it's sort of like you better have done some really, really, really good evaluations on these under the radar guys to pull this off.
Well, I mean, it's all going to be seen in the 2023 guys, because if I recall correctly, in 2022 they didn't take anybody. I mean, they took Cooper Lovelace, who's the JUCO, but then he's gone. Yeah. They're not going to play the 24 guys, and
we can only hope.
I should hope
the depth is not good. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say that they won't have to throw any of those guys in, but the depth is not good. And
so I mean, it's just the 23 guys and Clay Helton holdovers. So yes. I mean, that's the thing, is you can't, I think you're right about, it's a big year for Henson in terms of proving his development. But I mean, the slice of dudes that he's got to prove that development on is the 2023 guys, because I don't know how fair it is to evaluate his ability to develop the guys like Mason Murphy, who, I'm not here to pick on kids. If Mason Murphy turns out to suck yet again this year, is that really Josh Henson's fault?
No, but I will say that Mason Murphy was kind of the as a recruit, the profile of Mason Murphy is very similar to the profile of the current recruiting strategy that USC seems to have gone, or not, maybe not strategy, but just like the recruiting results on the offensive line. So it might not be totally his fault, but also if Mason Murphy is not in a position to be a serviceable offensive lineman for USC this year, and USC still has to play him, then to me, that's on Josh Henson.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, man. Like, I just, this is the trap of the offensive line. Like, it's why I jealously guard the Oregon offensive line. Like, I get like Oregon fans for like, why did you spend 12 paragraphs in your article about Oregon's offensive line? Is because you don't want to wind up in the USC type hole where, everybody's coming after you for your offensive line stinking, because it takes 5 years to dig out of it, if it ever does. All right, let's talk about the recitation. So this got weird in the bowl game. They moved guys around that I wasn't expecting. Jonah Monheim moved to right guard, which I was not expecting. And then in the spring game, I saw him snapping the ball. I actually thought that Monheim improved a little bit compared from 22 to 23 as a left tackle. I was really down on him in 22, and I kind of liked him in 23. And now I see him snapping the ball. What's up with that?
He is USC center. Whether that is because they literally didn't have anybody else after Justin Dedich left is a question that I could ask. But really, it seems to be it was Jonah Monheim or a walk-on, Killian O'Connor, and they were like, okay, then Jonah, it's up to you now.
So then, for real, the redshirt freshman Elijah Page is going to be the left tackle?
That is my expectation, yes.
And Mason Murphy, I guess, is going to give it another shot at right tackle.
Correct. That's how I have it.
Alan Inoa is going to be right guard. I think they believe in that guy. They keep getting, they kept giving him play. Pregnon, I talked about as like maybe the transfer portal effect will wear off for that guy. They're going to give him another shot at left guard, and that's the lineup.
Yeah, that's the 5. I think that's the 5 going into the season. I'm not penciling in Gino Quinones until we get a look at him, just knowing how injuries work and how long they can take to get back. But maybe at some point he comes in and that takes Pregnon out of that 5. But it is a pretty locked in 5, and I don't think there's any competition for any of those positions.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. Well, they just don't have any other guys.
There's no one else.
Just because so many dudes transferred out, right? Andrew Millick and Andres DeWerk transferred out. Grant Tucker, who I think was a walk-on, he graduated. Cooper Lovelace played in the spring game and then transferred to Northwestern. I tried to warn him. Just for sake of completion, I don't think he would have played, but the highest rated recruit, Jason Zondamela, transferred out as well. He was a 2024 guy and he transferred to Florida. They took 4 freshmen. We've alluded to them, but I think they're all going to redshirt. They range from a low 4-star to a mid 3-star. Just none of them knock your socks off enough to think that they're going to be early players. And then let's see, we talked about Quinones being injured. Another 2023 guy was still injured in the spring game. That's Micah Banuelos. And I don't know what they do for depth, man. Like the other guys that I was seeing in the spring game were Amos Talalele at right guard. That's another redshirt freshman. Tobias Raymond at right tackle. That's another redshirt freshman. You already mentioned him. Killian O'Connor, I think, is the only other guy who can stop the ball. He's a walk-on. I was seeing one of the true freshmen, Justin Tawanu'u, at left tackle. And then Lovelace was playing left guard, and he transferred out. So I don't even know who they're going to play at left guard. Maybe Quinones, assuming he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, if he can get back, yeah. This is the problem when you look at USC. I think if you told me that I get those 5, the 5 that we've named, and they're healthy all season long, I feel okay. I think they can do a job. Well, let's see what they do. I never bank on an offensive line not having injuries though, so I am extremely concerned.
Let's switch over and talk about the defense. They get Danton Lin, the defensive coordinator from UCLA. They had an interesting year, UCLA did, in that they finally had a not incompetent defensive coordinator and could take advantage of having some of the best edge rushers in the country. It was my opinion that it was difficult to evaluate Lin as a defensive coordinator because I think he just got out of the way of the asset that UCLA had, which was a good edge rush, and that he wasn't able to rescue the parts of UCLA's defensive roster that I didn't like, which were I thought their linebacker room stunk, and I thought a number, if not all, of their secondary players stunk. And so if you run out their stats, it's like all about their edge rush, like the difference between, like, they can't stop the run up the middle, and they can't, there's massive disparity between their third and short pass defense and the third and long pass defense, because they can pin their ears back and edge rush. So it's like, I can't evaluate Danton Lin, but at least he was not a complete goober, unlike everybody else that Chip Kelly hired at UCLA. And hey, I can think of a school that probably has some talent and could do better if they had not a goober at defensive coordinator, and that's the school across Figueroa. Is that your take as well, or are you real high on Danton Lin instead of just real high?
I am very hopeful of Danton Lin, mostly because of the Ravens connection, and everybody that I talk to who talks about that line, that sort of line of coaches, and then also just everybody who has known Danton Lin has talked about him like a rising star.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives me some hope. But I think you're hitting on my number one question about Danton Lin coming to USC. Number one, he just cannot be worse than Grinch, so I'll take that.
Mm.
Who is USC's Leatu Latu? Who is who are USC's, Murphy twins? I don't know. It's very hard because I have spent the last 2 years, beyond that, several years before even Grinch arrived, watching USC's defensive coordinators take players who I thought had talent and then find a way to make them completely and utterly ineffective. So, like, is Jamil Muhammad capable of being more than he was this past year? Or is that just who he is? Is Anthony Lucas just a 5-star bust? Or, is Braylon Shelby going to be able to sort of live up to some of the hype that we've heard? I don't know, though. None of those are proven commodities. None of them are players that you look at that have the first round NFL potential that Leatu Latu was bringing the whole way. So does Danton Lin's defense work if you don't have a first round NFL talent on the edge? Does USC have anybody in here who is a first round NFL talent?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my concern. That is, I'm very hopeful on the defense. I really am, but I'm also realistic about that major question.
Well, I thought it was interesting because I thought that we're going to get to these position units, and I'm going to try to do it fairly quick. But I liked their approach to the transfer portal on the secondary a lot more than I liked their approach to the front end, or maybe I should say I liked their successes in the portal in the back end. But I thought that they needed to do less to improve their cornerback room, and I thought that they needed to do more in order to improve the front end of their defense. And so it's like, oh man, these portal successes are backwards of what they needed to do.
Yep.
Especially given with the shape of where UCLA's defense, got its leverage last year. So I'm with you. I'm sort of curious to see how this is going to work out. All right, let's talk about the interior of the line first. They lose, a lot of dudes, if not a lot of production. They lose Kyron Bars. He graduated. They lose Dijon Benton. He transferred to New Mexico. They lose Tyron Taleni, who graduated. They lose Stanley Taufu, who transferred to Arizona. They lose Dejan Lafitte, who transferred to Fresno. And a dude named Isaiah Rakes, who came in from Texas A&M, transferred back out to Auburn. Do I have all that right?
That is correct. And I will the great what if of Isaiah Rakes is going to be
who knows.
They
returned Bear Alexander. There is actually a small tick up in USC's defensive efficiency in the middle, which is attributable entirely to Bear Alexander, the only good transfer that USC got on the defense last year. But he was injured in the spring game, so I didn't get to see him, but he should be good to go in the fall, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It wasn't a long-term thing.
They returned 3 other guys that I didn't really see last year, but because they were so short on bodies in the spring game, I saw them. Actually, I'm not even sure if one of them is an interior defensive lineman. They were just so short on dudes. I think they switched over a defensive end. The guy that I'm talking about is Devin Tompkins. I think he's actually a defensive end. They just were forced to play him in the middle.
Yeah, I think you're right about. I think I think he's back out on the outside now.
Yeah.
But
okay. The other 2 guys that I was seeing who were returners from last year was Elijah Hughes, who was a 2023 guy who got his feet wet a little last year, and the Kobe Pepe, who I was like, holy shit, that guy's still on the team.
Yep.
That guy's still on the team. They got some. Well, I think that's it for returners.
From the interior, yes.
Yeah, I think it's just Alexander, Hughes, and Pepe. And Pepe was a shock.
Honestly, shocked he didn't transfer. He hasn't he could have transferred any time over the last 4 years.
They got 3 freshmen, 2 of them pretty highly rated, Carlin Jones and GD Abasiri. And then another one's like a mid 3-star. That's Ratumana Bubulavu. They got 2 transfers, Nate Clifton from Vanderbilt and Gavin Meyer from Wyoming, which I think are like both the 3rd and 4th Vanderbilt Wyoming transfers. I mean, USC loves those guys. Those guys at least played before, unlike Hughes and Pepe. And then I think that's it in terms of interior defensive linemen. Now, what was interesting, what I was seeing in the spring game is unlike what like at UCLA, Danton Lynn was running a 3-down structure. I know in the NFL, he's run both kinds of structures. In the spring game, I was exclusively seeing him run a 4-down structure. Is that what we're doing at USC this year?
That's my assumption. My assumption is sort of two down interior linemen and then the 2 edge guys on either side.
So I don't do they have enough bodies here? Like, I mean, Alexander, Clifton, Meyer, is Hughes or Pepe going to step up to complete the rotation? Or are they going to get a true freshman? What's going on?
It feels like it's going to be Alexander, Clifton, Hughes, and Meyer. And then, yeah, it does get a little bit fuzzy. Like in an ideal world, they are able to, because Kobe Pepe just in terms of size has size that USC doesn't really have elsewhere. So in a perfect world, he comes through as somebody that USC can throw out there. USC is very light on 300-pounders, and he's one of them. So for that reason alone, I think hope would be high. My fear is that it will become a situation where they can't not play Jide Abasiri. And is that fair to a true freshman coming in?
Pretty big.
He's very. He's big. Better to have. I think by the time he gets through summer workouts, he might be up to 300 pounds or more. Let's see what happens. Like, better to have a 300-pound body than nothing, even if it's, sort of raw. But it's they needed. Okay, unlike the offensive line, where I understand why you don't bring in transfer offensive linemen.
You can get away with transfer defensive tackles.
They needed at least 1, if not 2, 300-pound defensive tackles, and they didn't really get them.
Yeah.
What they got were, for my money, like Clifton and Meyer are more sort of like defensive end kind of like defensive tackles in a 3-man front, but USC is going to be asking them to be
to one gap.
Yeah. So but I've also had to live through USC asking players who aren't nose tackles or tackles to play nose tackle or tackle over the last few years. So it's like, it's sort of par for the course. It's just very frustrating that it's still this way. Yeah. Especially since USC hired a NFL defensive line coach who is coached Aaron Donald for the past few years, produced a rookie of the defensive rookie of the year candidate. I would have hoped that might have had some
that's why
juice
I
on
wanted to ask. That's why I wanted to ask you about the structure, because like if I hadn't watched the spring game, I would think with these numbers and both the number of personnel and just looking at their weights and sizes that this is a 3-down defense. And then I watched Danton Lynn's defense last year and I was like, he was running a 3-down defense. But it was surprising.
But UCLA had a true nose tackle.
That's true, but like I think you could convert Alexander to be a nose.
I am guessing that will have to be what happens in theory. If USC does go with a more down lineman going up against Big Ten teams, I'm with you. I would have assumed that this would have been the case. I don't think they have enough bodies to pull it off, and that might why
I don't think they have enough bodies for a 4-down structure. Like I don't know how this is going to happen. I'm glad that Oregon doesn't play USC this year, not for that reason, because it means I don't have to write an article about USC, because I don't know how this is going to work, man. Good luck, Alicia.
I wish I had more answers for you, but it's all very confusing to me too.
It'll all come out on film.
Yeah,
I'm glad I don't have to write about it. Let's see. Ends. They lose Solomon Byrd, was drafted in the 7th round by the Texans. Romello Height transferred to Georgia Tech. Jack Sullivan came in from Purdue, I think just graduated. And Corey Foreman transferred to Fresno. I think that's it for the departures.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Jamil Muhammad returns. He was relatively productive last year. He come in from Georgia State. On the other hand, Anthony Lucas, as you implied, from Texas A&M, not super productive. Braylon Shelby was the 2023 4-star who, burned his red shirt. It was played in sort of the secondary rotation. There was like 2 guys, Bird and Muhammad were the 2 guys in the primary rotation, and then the secondary rotation was made up of Shelby, Lucas, and Height. So it was interesting that Shelby, as a true freshman, was, getting that much play. And I wonder if he just sort of takes Lucas's reps away. On the other hand, I was seeing Lucas playing with the ones along, opposite Muhammad. So I'm curious about that. The other guys who I saw coming back were Sam Green, who was another freshman last year, although he didn't get nearly as much play as Shelby did. I did not see Solomon Tuliapupu, who's been around forever. He was injured and held out of the spring game. And then the last 2023 guy was DJ Peavy, who I didn't see until real late in the spring game. I don't know what's going on with him. I think those are the 6 returners. And and then Devin Tompkins, who I did see, but he was a tackle being conscripted. So 7, I think, returning defensive ends, although really only 3 played last year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is like, it's like USC has an overabundance of defensive ends.
But I don't know if any of them are any good.
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Like none of them are Latu. None of them are the Murphy twins.
No, none of. Anthony Lucas maybe has maybe has a breakout sort of ability there, but we certainly haven't seen it at USC. Still a lot to prove there. Sam Green, a lot. I think he was somebody that was talked about very positively in the background, as somebody that they really like, that they think can take steps forward. But then again, Devin Tompkins was talked about that way too a couple of years ago, and he hasn't necessarily taken that step either. So it's like USC needed to swap out a couple of these unproven ends to bring in a couple of more potentially proven.
Yeah, I was surprised
they
didn't take anybody out of the transfer portal for this. They took 2 true freshmen, Cameron Fountain, who's very highly rated. I actually wonder if he'll play.
Yeah, I think he has potential there to play.
I mean, they might have to.
And that's really the question is there's a universe where he doesn't have to play, and that is the best case scenario for USC, but also can't.
Is Solomon Tuliapupu going to be okay?
The most injury-prone player in the history of USC football. Is he going to be available? I'm not banking on it, but it's. He seems to be a guy who works hard and tries to get out there and is very team oriented and does what USC asks of him. But I don't know. I'm not relying on his availability. Let's put it that way.
Linebacker. The position in which USC just keeps getting portal guys until they find somebody who works. Let's see. Tackett Curtis transferred to Wisconsin. I tried to warn him. Shane Lee, who came in from Alabama, I think just graduated. Chris Thompson, who came in from Auburn, transferred to Tulsa. Deuce Palmer, who came in from Southern Methodist, I think also just graduated. I think those are the 4 departures.
Yeah, that's everything.
They return Mason Cobb, who came in from Oklahoma State. He wound up, I believe, the leading tackler on the team last year. I don't know. I wasn't wild about the guy.
Being missed tackler too.
Yeah, ooh, that's a good line. Eric Gentry, the beanpole from Arizona State, also returns. Rajon Davis, maybe this will be his year, playing with the threes in the spring game. And then a guy named Garrison Madden, who I guess is on the team. I think those are the 4 returners.
Yeah, Garrison Madden was sort of a 3-star kind of. USC took a flyer on him. He's extremely fast. Haven't seen anything. Don't know if he's a viable. I don't get the feeling that he's a viable player at this point, but he is extremely fast. So
they got 3 freshmen, which is more than USC usually gets. Those were Elijah Newby, who was fairly highly rated, although he was playing with the 3s in the spring game. Desmond Stevens, who was less highly rated, was with the 2s. And Jaden Walker, who's a fall enrollee. And then the transfer is Oregon State's Eston Mascarenas-Arnold, who got like 1 million tackles for Oregon State last year. I think it's Mascarenas-Arnold and Cobb, and that's it.
Yes. Well, Gentry, depending on health, I think will be in the mix there of the 3. It's difficult because Gentry is, as you call him lovingly, the beanpole, and it's hard to see exactly where he fits just from where I don't know where he fits exactly, but it's Cobb and Mascarenas-Arnold. And I mean, I wish I could say Rajon Davis will make the step up, but we've been saying that for several years now. And
I sometimes feel like this is the Rajon Davis podcast.
I don't know. Here's the thing about linebackers at USC. I don't know. I mean, they bring in recruits we think are all really good. They come in, transfer. They bring in transfers, and we think, hey, that guy was very productive. He did a good job. He was so-and-so all whatever conference. Let's see what he does. Dud, injured. So, is it 3rd time's the charm from Easton Mascarenas-Arnold? Maybe, I hope. I don't know what it is about USC that makes linebackers step on campus and suddenly become the worst versions of themselves. I wish I had an answer.
I mean, it wasn't Alex Grinch either, because it goes back at least 3 defensive coordinators.
USC has not had a half decent linebacker since Cam Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's crazy, and it kind of defies the law of averages. Like, yes. I mean, just by dumb luck, it should have happened by now. Like,
yeah, math loses here.
Yeah, cornerbacks. A lot of departures. Christian Roland Wall.
One thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one thing on linebackers. My only core, very, very core piece of hope is that Matt Entz is an extremely accomplished coach who comes to USC as a linebackers coach because he simply has not been given a chance because he was in lower division FCS, and maybe he can work some magic. Because if Matt Entz can't do the job, then I will just give up on that position.
I mean, Mascarenas-Arnold knows what he's doing. I think he's got a talent ceiling, but he knows what he's doing. Like, I can tell you that from having charted every single snap he's ever taken. Like,
he was that's my hope. Like, he's not an incompetent player.
Yeah, I mean, if USC turns him into an incompetent player, like that's it. Like, dig up Memorial Coliseum and relocate it because it's cursed.
Yes.
All right, cornerbacks. Christian Roland Wallace signed a UDFA with the Chiefs. Damani Jackson transferred to Bama. C.R. Wright transferred to Nebraska. Triquan Figgins transferred to UCF. Fabian Ross transferred to Hawaii. Do I have all that right?
That's everybody.
Jalen Smith returns but was injured in the spring game. He got like 75 tackles last year. That's how much he was getting challenged. Jacoby Covington, who had transferred in from Washington, returns. He was playing with the ones in the spring game. Prophet Brown returns. He confused me because I was seeing him play outside corners with the twos in the spring game, but I was also seeing him play nickelback with the ones. Do you know what the deal with him is?
So I'm guessing that it was because Jalen Smith was out. And I think they've just sort of been throwing him in there.
Do you know what position they would prefer him to play?
That I don't know, and that's something I wish I had a better handle on. In sort of my mock depth chart that I put together, I have him at nickelback.
Okay.
Mostly because I don't know where he gets in at corner.
I think I agree with you because of the length issue. Like it seemed like there was a deliberate strategy to get longer here, and he's one of the short guys. And meanwhile, it's okay to be a little shorter if you're playing nickel in this structure, as long as you hit pretty hard, which I think he doesn't do bad at that. And then the last returner was a 2023 guy who we didn't see him last year. That was Malachi Crawford, who's interesting. He was very highly rated and is a long guy. Curious to see how he figures into all of this. Brought in 3 freshmen who I believe will play cornerback. I saw Marcellus Williams in the spring game, and then the other 2 I think are fall enrollees, Isaiah Rubin and Braylon Conley. Those guys are going to be corners, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 3 transfers are John Humphrey, who played corner at UCLA, but he was hurt in the spring game. DeCarlos Nicholson, who's with the ones, he was from Mississippi State. And then Greedy Vance, who committed after the spring game. He was originally from Louisville and then went to Florida State. Those are the 3 cornerback transfers. I think they took a lot of transfers here because they sort of didn't. I don't know how much they believe in Jacoby Covington.
Which, I mean, is rough because, I mean, that's been the story of Jacoby Covington's time at USC is it's felt like he should be playing and then they seem to not want to play him. And now it's a different coaching staff and maybe they see the same thing. Personally, I don't quite understand it, but
I mean, I don't understand why they took him in the first place. I think they had way more talented and promising dudes, and then they sort of chased him out. Like,
well, so it's Dante Williams. It's almost felt like they have just been. Dante Williams is like a as a recruiter, he's like a cult personality a little bit, and the moment he leaves, it's like they're sort of wiping their hands of all of the guys that he brought in, whether they are wiping their hands of them or those guys were only there for Dante Williams and just, peace out because he's not there anymore.
So where do you have Jalen Smith in the depth chart?
I have him starting nickel.
Interesting.
I think he sort of fits the mold for USC of a nickel who sort of can play a little bit like a safety sometimes, even though he's not quite big enough for that. But this is my best guess at what the 2 corners and nickels will be. It's Nicholson, Humphrey, and Jalen Smith.
You think Humphrey and Nicholson on the outside, Smith at nickel?
Yes.
And you also have Brown as like another nickel?
Yeah, Prophet Brown. And I don't know enough about Greedy Vance at this point. So I threw him in at nickel on my depth chart too, just because we'll find out on that one.
Safeties. They lose Kalen Bullock. He was drafted in 3rd round by the Texans. He didn't have quite the same magical interception year as he did last year, although he still had 2. End of an era, Max Williams finally graduated. It felt like he was there forever. And then Zamarian Gordon transferred to Coastal Carolina. I think that's it.
Yeah. They I'm a little bit surprised they kept as many safeties as they
Well, they kept Bryson Shaw, who might be the worst safety in the conference. They kept Zion Branch, Zachariah's brother, but he was injured and held out of the spring game. They kept Anthony Beavers, who I'm not sure got a fair shot last year. And they kept Christian Pierce, although I've barely seen him. Like he was a 2023 guy. I didn't really see him that much last year, and he's with like the 4th team in the spring game. So I still don't know what to think about him.
Yeah, he was. I think he was dealing with some injuries last fall, but he had been talked about like he was maybe even ahead of Zion Branch in terms of being in the pecking order. So it was a little bit. It is a little bit weird, sort of figuring out why has his star waned a little bit, or if it's just settling in or something.
They got 2 true freshmen, Marquise Gallegos and Jarvis Boatwright. Gallegos is like a low 4-star. Boatwright's like a high 3-star. Both of those guys came in relatively late in the spring game. They got 2 transfers, both Pac-12 dudes, Kamari Ramsey from UCLA, Keely Arnold from Oregon State. Both of those guys were with the ones in the spring game. I thought they got them for a reason. I thought that safeties were really, 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 really badly developed by Alex Grinch. I, in fact, thought that he was a worse safeties coach than he was a defensive coordinator, and I tried to tell Wisconsin that, and they weren't listening to me. Simply because he was developed the least by Alex Grinch, I would actually have the most hope for Christian Pierce. And I think my order of how much hope I have for you as a safety in this room is the inverse order of how old you are. So I have the most hope for Pierce, and then Branch, and then Beavers, and then last is Shaw. And then the transfers who have been developed by Grinch, not at all. Those guys are number ones. That's my pecking order. Alicia, what do you think about that?
100%. I mean, just look at Kalen Bullock, who got worse every year that he was at USC after showing a lot of promise as a freshman. Yeah, Kamari Ramsey and Keely Arnold come in to just be the guys. The real question that I have is, Zion Branch has a lot of potential. His development got interfered with a little bit by injuries, and so.
Because it just feels like it's forever since I've seen the guy, and I just wanted to check in with him, because I agree with you. I think that guy's got all the talent in the world, and I just wish he didn't have Alex Grinch's hooks into him.
I think that he was out for spring because of the injury that he suffered coming through. Yeah. So again, it's a question of what is he when he comes back, right? That's the big question. But I think you've got to sort of look at him as a potential, if things go, if something happens to Ramsey or Arnold, or if they're looking for, other guys to rely on that aren't Bryson Shaw, which I think all USC fans are hoping to be the case, Zion Branch has to be up there as a potential. I think Christian Pierce is another guy that a lot of people would hope would be up there as somebody who can come in and be part of, sort of become a trusted third there.
Yeah.
But
there's 3 potential dudes, any of whom could take Bryson Shaw's job away as a backup safety. You've got to hope that one of them does.
We'll see. And that's my big question, because it's different with a new defensive staff. So this might not sort of follow, but I tend to assume that the older the player is, the more likely they are to simply play, because coaches don't like taking risks. So they go with the veteran guy. My hope would be that they don't fall into that trap, because there's a lot to like. I mean, even Anthony Beavers, I'm not, I don't, he's another one where it's why can't he get on the field? If Bryson Shaw is able to be on the field, what is it about Anthony Beavers that isn't allowing him to get on the field?
I don't get it, man. I mean, yeah.
A lot. I mean, and this is where sometimes I have to sort of sit back and these are the things that we're not privy to. We're not in the meeting rooms. Maybe he just doesn't.
Yeah, maybe he's a total jerk on film study.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that that's the case, but it's hard to know because I'm not in those rooms. But I've not heard from anybody that that's the case on him, so I'm not going to assume it, but it's weird. Bryson Shaw, the coaches love him for what
he's got to be like the luckiest safety in college football. He's played for all these different blue bloods and just stuck up the field in every one of them.
Yep.
Well, another year of studying USC, another list of questions and mysteries we may never solve.
I wish I had more answers for you guys every time I came on. Like, I feel like I spend the entire show with you guys going like, I don't know.
Well,
I hope.
It's better than some people will be like, well, they got a real chip on their shoulder and we think there's a good energy. We like to know the truth, Sometimes we just don't freaking know these things. Alicia, you are always a great guest.
Man, I still think USC is going to melt a bunch of people's faces. And I also think a lot of USC's defensive woes had to do with playing in the Pac-12 where there's like a good quarterback, you can't throw a rock without hitting a good quarterback. And I mean, oh my God, Alicia, have you been watching any of this Big Ten film on quarterback play? Like, I mean, Bryson Shaw really could shut down most of these quarterbacks, and he could be great out there.
Really, really quickly on this. This is one of my things that I've been sort of telling people is that USC's schedule is very difficult, but if you look at the difference in quarterbacks that USC's facing this season versus last season, it is a joke. Like, oh yeah, I don't think I think we went through and it's like we don't think there's a single quarterback, maybe like Garrett Nussmeier if he turns out to be sort of reach his full potential, who would be in the top 5 quarterbacks that USC faced last year, like that could break into that. That gives me hope for USC's defense.
It's nowhere close. I'll put that chart in my article. I'll figure out those numbers, the NCAA passer ratings of quarterbacks that USC played last year versus the ones that they are likely to play in 2024, and I'm willing to bet it's just like all the 2023 ones are to the right and all the 2024 ones are to the left, and that there's like no intermixing or overlap.
That's my my feeling. Yeah.
Alicia De Artola-Castillo, once again, thanks so much for coming on. Go over to Twitter at Penguin of Troy, at Reign of Troy, one of the absolute great, surviving Pac-12 podcasts, or whatever you want to call it. Thanks so much for joining us again, Alicia.
Thank you guys for having me. It's always fun.
That's right. We understand you got the new college football game, so you got to get out of here and you got to start
I'm
playing.
Ready.
Nice.
Yes, indeed.
And hit the day as always. Wonderful having you on.
It was my pleasure, Alicia. Always a blast.
All right, let's represent the Pack this next season. Go Ducks, go Trojans. See y'all next week. Quack, quack.